And welcome to the October 2018 edition of the monthly Special Education Point of Contact webinar. Today's webinar is brought to you by the cross-division efforts of the Division of Data Assessment and Research, the Division of Student Transportation, the Division of Systems and Supports K-12, and the Division of Teaching and Learning. If you have not already done so, you may access a copy of the handout for today, the slide deck, or a black and white printable version of the slide deck using the tool in your menu bar on your screen. We will also post a copy of these slides in addition to the webinar recording within 48 hours after this training. Today we're going to first start off with some updates from our IDEA compliance and monitoring team around a few special education laws and policies, and as well as compliance and monitoring. Then we will talk about the ongoing IEP quality training series, go through a few SEDS administrative reminders, and of course our favorite topic this time of year, child count. Now that we are in the middle of child count, we will be giving you some reminders to help the process go a little smoother, as well as help you identify some errors that you may be working through and the quickest way to do amendments to ease your child count troubles. And then we will have brief updates from the transportation team and end with a few reminders and announcements. As always, we welcome your input and questions, so feel free to type in the question chat box at any time. First, before we get started, let's do a quick poll question to see who we have on the line at this time. What is your current role as it relates to the LEA Special Ed point of contact? Are you the main point of contact for your entire LEA, whether that's one campus or 10 campuses or 154 campuses? Or do you play more of a supporting role? Or are you at the campus level and you just tuned in today for the updates to see what may apply to you? All right, it looks like our audience today is mostly the main points of contact. That's great. And we also are interested in knowing your experience level serving as the LEA Special Ed point of contact. Please take a moment to vote. Looks like we have a mix of experienced and newer special ed points of contact. I'm showing the results here on the screen. All right, first I'm going to turn the time over to Ms. Christy Weaver-Harris from our Special Education Policy team to give some reminders and announcements.
Good morning, everybody. Just as a reminder, initial evaluation monitoring for the prior school year for 17-18, the 10-day correction window ended on September 18th, 2018. And during that 10-day window for both initial evaluation and reevaluation, LEAs can demonstrate compliance by showing that the eligibility determination was completed timely, that the student is no longer enrolled at your LEA, that the student is no longer receiving special education services, or that the student had a transfer event outside of your LEA during the period. We anticipate that the initial report for reevaluation monitoring will be released later this month, and that was for the time frame of April 2018 through September of 2018. And during the 10-day correction window, any documentation submitted by LEAs after the release that demonstrates that untimely completion of eligibility determinations were completed, that will be considered evidence when we close out findings, because you do have 1 year from the date of the finding to resolve the noncompliance. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge that a few LEAs reached out to us in the last couple of days about some issues around timelines in SEDS. Thank you for raising those concerns, and please, when you encounter a problem with the system, please continue to raise that for us. We have been in contact with the vendor for SEDS and understand that the issue that you guys had been seeing the last couple of days has been resolved. If you continue to see problems, please submit an OST ticket or contact your DAR liaison.
Thank you, Christy. And now we want to hear from the audience. It's been a few months now that we've had these new timelines in place for initial evaluation, and we are interested in hearing from you around what are some of the biggest challenges faced by your LEA and your school campuses in completing the initial evaluations on time under the new timeline. But we also are interested with the reevaluations as well. There may be challenges that you have with the 3-year triennial timeline in addition, although those laws have not changed. Here at OSSE, we are extremely interested in knowing how we can better support you in achieving timeliness under these laws. So anything you type into the chat box will be extremely helpful. This is a safe space. Anything you put in the chat box will not be held against you in any way for compliance or findings. We will only be using this feedback that you provide today to inform how we can better support you as a whole, and we will not tie it directly to your LEA. Later today, there is a leadership meeting from several divisions to discuss how we can further support you in initial evaluation timeliness and reevaluation timeliness. So your feedback you provide right now will literally be shared with our leadership in a few hours. I will pause for one moment. I will be on mute for one moment to give you a little more time to type in your chat box at this time. Thank you for providing your feedback. We'll give you about 30 more seconds to continue sharing your feedback online. This is extremely insightful. Thank you. Thank you so much for all of this feedback. We are overwhelmed with the amount of feedback in a good way. Thank you for being open and candid and sharing that with us. We are seeing some common themes of when students are absent a large number of days. It makes it difficult to move forward with the evaluation process. We're also seeing some common themes about receiving a higher number of referrals in a shorter amount of time with a shorter timeline to turn those around, so the capacity issues. Also, there's definitely a lot of you out there with the same challenge of not being able to hire trained evaluators to complete the evaluation. So definitely on the lack of evaluators who are available to assist in a very short timeline. Some of you expressed challenges with staff buy-in with the new timeline and processes, and also challenges with not getting the required forms back to be able to move things forward. There was mention of the compliance symbols in SEDS, and we do want you to know that we have worked with the vendor, and the issue around compliance symbols in SEDS should now be resolved. If you find that that's not the case, please let us know immediately. Thank you. Again, thank you for this feedback, and if you think of something later during the webinar, you're also welcome to type in the chat box at that time. And this will be shared with OSSE leadership later today. Okay, now I'm going to remind you of a training series that has been developed this year. My colleague, Ms. Jennifer Carpenter, has been spending hundreds of hours putting together a evidence-based, research-based training that truly does focus on improving the quality of your IEPs. And here you can see the breakdown of the training. We are just wrapping up part 1. Over 80 people have signed up, and there's an additional many on the wait list for part 1. And we have been pleased to see everyone come in and have such robust dialogue around IEP development in part 1. We are now pleased to announce that registration is open for part 2. The link on this slide is a hyperlink to the registration page. Part 2, if you did not participate in part 1, you are still welcome to come to part 2. As a standalone training, part 2 itself will be very valuable to you, so we encourage you to sign up. And I just want to underscore that the purpose of this training is for people like you who oversee special education at your whole LEA. I want to say this is kind of like a train the trainer, or this particular training is meant to have you come and get your mind turning about how you can go back and establish new internal protocols at your LEA for IEP development as a whole, in addition to other aspects of your special education programming. So if you and a couple of your key staff members from your LEA come to these trainings, I promise you, you will walk away happy that you came and with a lot of resources and considerations to take back and share out with your entire staff. We can certainly not, OSCE can certainly not train every single person in the district who develops an IEP, but we hope that by training you and some of your colleagues, you can pass this information along to those that you oversee at your LEAs. And during these trainings, one of the most valuable things that has been stated so far is that opportunity to hear from your peers. There's structured opportunities to learn from your counterparts at other LEAs as part of this training, and that can make it a really effective and good use of your time to come in and step away from your very busy schedule. I know you're all so busy to come and participate in this training, so we look forward to seeing you there. Now I will turn the time over to Rita Larkins with the data team to give us some reminders about SEDS.
Great, thank you, Annette. The section that I'm going to be covering, we've discussed this in previous webinars, and I'm sure you must be thinking, why are we talking about this again? Based on OST tickets, it's come to our attention that several LEAs still have not flipped their SEDS system over to the 18-19 school year. I know, unbelievable. Let me just state the importance of this. It impacts the ability for special ed teachers and other staff to access documents in the 18-19 school year that have been created. So we get OST tickets saying that, you know, I created a PWN, but I can't access it in the student's records. One thing that we ask you to do is to flip your system over. So you won't be able to access those 18-19 documents if you have not rolled over your school system. That requires you going to the school system calendar icon, entering the start and end dates for your 18-19 school year, and then making that active. Therefore, folks are able to access the documents. The next thing that you have to do in this arena is to also enter your progress reporting periods. This is important because providers and special ed teachers that are responsible for creating student progress reports will not be able to access the appropriate progress reporting period if you have not entered the dates for progress reports. So just to show you where that lives, you need to put in the dates for the 18-19 school year as in this section for 18-19, and then you also need to edit your reporting periods and enter the dates for those reporting periods. And that is for your progress reports that go along with the general ed report card. Next, I want to talk about account management for related service providers. LEA special ed POCs are responsible for protecting student privacy, their information. And that means you are in control of access to student records in SEDS. LEA POC should not create accounts for aggregate users. Typically, those are your related service providers that service multiple LEAs. So how should you get access for a related service provider? You should enter a request via the OST. OSCE will then create an account for that user and add the user to your LEA SEDS site. The POC, you great folks on the line, will then give specific school access to the location, sorry about that, that user should be accessing. So if you have multiple schools in your LEA, you will only give access to the school that the provider is serving students. So they should not have access to all schools within your LEA unless they are servicing all locations in your LEA. Additionally, the SPED POC will then add that provider to a student's caseload. If you have a provider that has SEDS access and they click on students and they are not able to access any records, I would ask that you verify that you have added students to their caseloads. Due to security, providers are not able to add students to their own caseload. We are counting on you, the LEA SPED POC, to set up caseloads for providers so that they have access to student records. Next, I want to talk about non-public staff. SEDS access for non-public staff, again, it's a collaboration between the LEA, the non-public, and OSSE. Your non-public SEDS point of contact at the non-public campus, who has been designated as a POC, is responsible for coordinating access for those non-public users. Also providing training for the non-public staff on how to use SEDS. So your LEA POC, you're responsible for overseeing that access for any user, including the non-publics who service students from your LEA. You can create an OST ticket to request access. Only the non-public SEDS POC and/or the LEA Special Ed POC can communicate with the OSSE help desk by using the OSSE support tool. It is never appropriate to have non-public staff contact OSSE staff directly for access to SEDS. They should do so through the OST, and that is only the non-public SPED point of contact. That person is designated to do that. Next, we want to talk about removing students from the SEDS roster. During this time, a lot of folks are asking or requesting through OST that we remove students that are no longer attending your LEA, students that have graduated with a diploma, or students that have aged out, meaning they have reached the age of 22, or students that have transferred to a new LEA outside of the district, or the transfer process has not been completed. The slide that you are currently seeing tells you the resolution steps in order to remove a student from SEDS. Now, if you have not followed the steps that are on this screen, please do not enter an OST ticket requesting removal of a student from the system until you have followed the outlined due diligence. We do appreciate you following these steps to ensure that students are removed in a timely manner and that we are able to assist you when you enter OST tickets. I'm going to pause in this section so that if you have any questions about what I have just covered before I move on, you can enter them in the chat box. Great. Let's talk quickly about the summary of performance in SEDS. Just so that we're all clear, the summary performance should be completed no later than 60 days before graduation. Failure to do this may result in the student remaining active in SEDS after they have graduated. So within the IEP process, you'll go to the post-secondary transition plan and click on Create Summary of Performance button. This will allow you to complete the summary of performance, or SOP, in the system. This should also be completed for any graduates that you are requesting removal in SEDS. The next group of students I want to discuss are students that are aged out. Aged out means that they have either earned a regular diploma or they have turned 22 by the end of the semester. Create the age out form in SEDS. That serves as a prior written notice. It must also be signed by the head of school. when you are requesting removal of a student due to aging out, we will verify that the age out form is present in the student's record in SEDS and that it has also been signed by the head of school. We are noticing a number of forms that are created without the appropriate signatures. That will delay the student in being removed from SEDS. On the screen that you're currently seeing is the age out form, which you can find under Documents in your student's record.
Hi, this is Christy Weaver-Harris. We've gotten some questions about students who either exit the program and enroll out of state or who drop out but are over the age of compulsory attendance. So they've dropped out, but neither of these students has obtained a diploma or graduated from your program. So those instances are governed under the entry and exit guidance, and you should refer to that document on OSSE's website for more information on the appropriate steps to exit those students. And anytime a student exits your LEA, we encourage you to issue a PWN or exits your LEA to an LEA or drop out outside of the District of Columbia. We encourage you to issue a PWN. But in general, we want to remind you that the summary of performance, or the SOP, is only required for students who either age out of your program or who obtain a diploma. So those are the two instances in which FAPE will terminate for the child. So it's the only time that that you must issue a summary of performance, and that is governed by IDEA. And the purpose there is so that the student has a document that they can use to go obtain services outside of the educational realm. So they need assistance either in post-secondary education, or they need to go to the Department of Disability Services. So it gives them a summary document that shows what their abilities are, the services that they've received, and provides general background information on the student so they can take that information and obtain adult services with it. There's another question about what to do for students who have passed away. That's all. You can also find more information on that in the entry and exit guidance. And I would encourage you to refer to that guidance often, because it has a lot of information about the appropriate ways to document all these instances in which kids just don't, or that are no longer in your LEA. And that's how you can best document for OSSE to know to either remove those students from your SEDS roster or to keep them on your SEDS roster, because in the District of Columbia, we like to ensure that each student is accounted for within the special education data system, so that we know what who the LEA is that is responsible for that child.
Thank you, Christy. Now we will review some child count reminders and data error in helping you to prepare for child count. Just as a reminder, you want to be sure that all students were enrolled as of October 5th. Those are the students that will be used for child count. You will also need to work with your LEA data manager and enrollment staff to make sure that the student information in your SIS is accurate. At this point, all special ed POCs should have access to view UDE errors in Qlik. This is something that you should be reviewing on a daily basis. You want to ensure that your IEPs are accurate and up to date for educational environment, services, dedicated aids, and disability categories. You are to amend IEPs to correct these errors or anomalies prior to November 16, 2018. Only IEPs that were amended before November 16, 2018 will be considered timely and will be inclusive of child count. If your LEA special ed POC, because I understand we have a few new POCs, you should have access to the UDE errors, the Unified Data Errors Qlik application. If for some reason you do not have that access, please contact your DAR liaison for further assistance. Next, I'm going to review just a few of the common child count data errors and some things that you can do to ensure that you have reviewed all student records. The first thing I want to talk about is when you're doing searches for student records in SEDS, when you use the filter special ed, it may not include students that have expired IEPs or records that are not fully transferred. So as a best practice, you should not filter for special ed when doing your student searches so that you are not missing students that may have expired IEPs. If the special ed level is incorrect, one of the things to check is that the start and end dates of the services in the IEP are correct. I want to also make the distinction between information that is in your IEP workspace and the data that is on your finalized IEP. We are using the information that is in your finalized IEP. So confirm that the least restrictive environment percentage and check marks are appropriately marked. If the educational environment is being pulled from the most recent IEP and it is not correct, it may be appropriate for you to complete an IEP amendment prior to November 16, 2018. To further demonstrate this area of the educational environment, in the top section, just to point this out to you, it gives you the least restrictive environment that was identified in the previous IEP. This is not necessarily the environment that's appropriate in the current IEP that you're working on. So you will see the percentage, it is automatically calculated, and then you must select the correct LRE category. A lot of people make this error, and this should be corrected for the purposes of child count. You will need to do an IEP amendment, in which you can do an amendment without convening a meeting with the permission of the parent and the LEA, or you could have an IEP amendment to discuss the IEP with the parent. In this last section, I just want to briefly talk about using UDE, the Qlik application for child count. In the Qlik application, I'm going to pause here just for a second before I go into this section. We have a few questions about the previous section. Okay, so the question is about insufficient hours for speech-only IEPs. A lot of times you will see this as an error, but this is really just an anomaly that's being flagged for you to verify that the student has hours for a speech-only IEP. So if you have a speech-only IEP and the hours that are on the IEP are correct, please reach out to your DAR liaison to assist you in removing that error from your UDE count. Now, I mentioned UDE errors. Where do you find that information, and where can you find additional information about errors? In the Qlik application, LEA POCs have access to 3 main applications in Qlik. They are the Related Services Management Report, Unified Data Errors, and the SWD Access Data. LEAs that do not have access to Qlik, please contact your DAR liaison to ensure that you can access Qlik and so that they can instruct you as to what trainings and information is needed for you to obtain that access. You want to be sure that you are listed as the SPED POC in eSchool Plus.
And now we'll turn the time over just for a couple minutes to the transportation team, to Doug Johnson, to give us a few updates on what's going on in the world of student transportation. All right, go ahead, Doug.
Good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
You're loud and clear.
All right, thank you. So right now, we do have a new name for the transportation system that is coming up for CRM. We haven't given that out, but the announcement is coming soon, so be on the lookout for that. I know our director have that in the LEA look forward, so be on the lookout for the new name for the CRM system. Recently, we have been receiving phone calls on students' transportation cancellations due to residency issues. So if you do have a student that has some type of residency issue, please give us a phone call ahead of time if you're going to terminate that student's transportation until you all figure out, their living arrangement or something to that extent. So our bus drivers and attendants won't go past that particular student house. But this, I would say, contact the Parent Resource Center. If you don't have the Parent Resource Center number, that number is 202-576-5000. If you're having any issues with students with residency issues. And just to let you all know that CRM has gone live internally within our teams here at DOT. So our audit and compliance teams, they're using the new CRM system, our Parent Resource Center, and also our dispatchers are using it as well. So everything has been moving smoothly with that, and they're getting acclimated to the new system. And we're getting excited for when that training comes so we can introduce it to everyone. But in the future, if you have any questions or any assistance with TOTE, just make sure you all please contact 202-576-5520, or you can send us an email at dot.data@dc.gov, and one of our team members will reply to your email with your concerns or questions. And that's all I have this week.
Great, thank you. All right, and now time for one more poll question where we'd love your input. As you serve as the LEA Special Ed point of contact, one of the important jobs that you have is to transfer the knowledge that you have about your responsibilities to other relevant staff at your LEA. And we are interested in hearing from the field some best practices about how you establish a knowledge transfer process at your LEA to ensure that other people also know what needs to be done in the case that there is staff turnover. Now, hopefully none of you will ever leave your jobs, but as we know, staff turnover happens, and so we are interested in hearing from you some of your best practices so that we can compile those and share them with other LEAs who do not yet have a solid knowledge transfer process in place at their LEA. And in addition to hearing some of your best practices, what's working, we are also interested in hearing what's not working. Again, this is the input you give will not be used against you in any way for compliance or findings. We are simply just interested in hearing from you on some of the challenges that your LEA has faced. Maybe you're currently facing them now or have in the past with regards to ensuring that there's a continuity of special education responsibilities among the staff, even when there may be staff turnover or leadership turnover or going from school year to school year and such. So again, this is just an open-ended response. We're very interested in hearing from you, both best practices and things that have worked well at your LEA for how you pass along information and help others be able to, and how you build capacity and help others be able to support you in your roles in the case that there's ever turnover. And we're also interested in hearing challenges around that so that OSCE can better support LEAs. I'm going to pause for one moment while you continue to reflect on this and hopefully share something in the chat box. And these we will compile and share out at a later webinar in the future. All right, thank you for that feedback. It's extremely helpful. Now we're going to move things along to close out today's webinar. We first want to remind you of existing SEDS resources. You may have some new staff with you this school year, a service provider perhaps that has never used the District of Columbia SEDS system before. This webinar recording is a great place, called Getting Started with SEDS, Related Service Provision 101. Everything you need to know about the difference between a service tracker and a service log, how to, and all the stuff that a service provider would need to do in SEDS. There's also a recording about the initial eligibility process from start to finish in SEDS. And of course, that also applies to the reevaluation process. That documentation in SEDS, as much of it is the same as the initial eligibility process documentation. And I want to remind you there is a 200-page manual with step-by-step instructions and pictures for how to do a number of things in SEDS. This can be also a great resource to share with your staff so that you do not have to sit down next to them every time they need to use SEDS. And of course, if you are tuning in today for the first time in the school year, we strongly encourage you to go back and listen to the August and September webinar recordings, as they contain vital information to your role. And now I have an announcement about something that's really fun that some of your students may be interested in. This is not an OSSE project. However, School Talk is an organization that OSSE works with very closely to support secondary age students in their transition, students with disabilities. There is an opportunity, let me just show you the flyer online. There is an opportunity for students with disabilities to gain some career and employment training by working with the hip-hop artist, Conscience. He came and was the MC for our Voices of Change Youth Forum this past spring, and now he will be working with students with disabilities to teach them about what it takes to have a career in the music production industry. If you have high school students who have an IEP who may be interested in this program, definitely have them apply. The deadline is coming up very quickly, and everything you need to know can be found here on this slide or by going over to see the flyer. There's also a contact person at School Talk if you have questions. So just passing this along as a really cool opportunity for high school students with IEPs. All right, and then we want to go back. There is one mistake on the slide that we want to clarify with you at this time. On this slide, we reported at the top that the 10-day correction window for initial evaluation monitoring from last school year, that the 10-day correction window ended September 18th, 2018. That is incorrect. The date is actually October 18th, 2018, which is tomorrow. So the 10-day correction window ends tomorrow. We apologize for the error on this slide. Again, this should say October, not September, right here on your screen. And now we will go ahead and end our webinar. Thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions, we will stay on the line for a few minutes to try to answer those questions in the chat box, and you can contact any of these teams here on the screen for any additional questions following today's broadcast. We will post the recording within the next 2 business days, as well as a copy of the slides. Thank you for joining us today, and have a wonderful October.